Battle of Cinquefield Creek War 1813. Sarah Merrill's survival story. Want to hear an incredible, true survival story that History Channels won't tell? You join us as we uncover the harrowing tale of Sarah Merrill, a frontier woman who survived being scalped by Creek Indians and saved her infant child against all odds. Like and subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for more untold frontier tales that shaped America. The Creek War of 1813 to 1814 stands as one of the bloodiest chapters in American frontier history, yet many of its most remarkable stories remain untold. In the wake of the Fort Mims massacre, where over 500 soldiers and civilians lost their lives in a single devastating attack, another dramatic series of events would unfold that would test the limits of human endurance and courage. The story begins with the Kimball family, who had journeyed from the relative safety of South Carolina to carve out a new life along the Tombigbee River. By 1807, they had established themselves near McGrew's Reserve, building a productive plantation through years of hard work. Their search for prosperity would eventually lead them to the Bassett's Creek Valley in 1812, where they settled near a respected pioneer named Cinquefield. The growing threat of Muskogee incursions had prompted the construction of a sturdy stockade, named after Cinquefield himself. The Kimball family, along with their neighbors, including the James family, initially sought refuge within its wooden walls. However, the cramped conditions of frontier fort life soon became unbearable in the summer heat. After several weeks passed without any sign of Creek warriors east of the Alabama River, both families made the decision to return to their more spacious plantation homes. During that fateful final week of August 1813, an uneasy peace settled over the valley. While the settlers remained aware of potential dangers, they couldn't have imagined the swift and terrible fate that awaited them. On the night of August 31st, as darkness wrapped around the plantation, young Isham Kimball and one of Abner James's daughters stayed up to care for an ailing family member. The quiet night was suddenly shattered when their dogs erupted in violent barking. The sound of multiple footsteps could be clearly heard rushing past the house, swift, purposeful, and terrifying in their stealth. Miss James demonstrated remarkable composure, immediately extinguishing their candle to avoid drawing attention to their presence. When dawn arrived, bringing with it the false comfort of daylight, they chose to remain in their homes rather than seek the protection of the stockade. This critical error in judgment reflected a common human tendency to dismiss clear warnings of danger, a tendency that would cost many lives in the hours to come. The afternoon of September 1st, 1813 began like any other at 3 o'clock. The creek bottom that had seemed so peaceful suddenly erupted with movement as Francis, known among his people as the Prophet, emerged with his warriors. The timing couldn't have been worse. Ransom Kimball was away from home, leaving his family vulnerable. Inside the house, Abner James and his visitor Walker found themselves under immediate fire from the Creek warriors. Though both men escaped injury, they made the difficult decision to flee, taking only James's 14-year-old Thomas and his daughter, Mary, with them as they raced toward Fort Cinquefield. Their desperate flight to safety would leave the remaining women and children to face the warriors alone. Meanwhile, at the blacksmith shop 150 yards from the main house, 16-year-old Isham Kimball was working with his younger brother when the first gunshots shattered the afternoon calm. Looking toward his home, he witnessed a scene of unprecedented horror. Creek warriors had surrounded his father's house and were systematically killing everyone inside. With his young brother beside him, Isham faced a terrible choice: stay and face certain death, or attempt a dangerous mile-long run to the stockade, through territory now controlled by hostile warriors. The Kimball brothers veered away from the main road, their feet pounding against the unfamiliar terrain. Despite their caution, Creek warriors spotted them and opened fire. The shot whistled through the air, tearing through the nearby chinquapin bushes, but miraculously missing both boys. As they crossed a small stream dividing the territories, disaster struck. The elder brother stumbled and fell hard. When he regained his footing and turned to check on his younger sibling, he found only empty space where the boy should have been. The younger Kimball had been there just moments before, unharmed when the Indians fired their shot. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the child. Despite extensive searches and inquiries in the years that followed, no trace of him was ever found. No body, no captivity report. Nothing like a shadow at sunset. He simply vanished from the records of Clark's white settlers on that September 1, 1813. Isham Kimball, now alone and disoriented, pressed on toward the stockade. Unsure of his direction in the thick wilderness, he climbed the slanting trunk of a fallen pine tree to survey his surroundings. His heart froze as Creek voices drifted up from the road below, forcing him to scramble down from his exposed position. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him when salvation appeared in the form of Thomas Matlock and John Owen. These two men had heard the gunfire and bravely left the stockade to investigate. They found the exhausted youth and escorted him safely back to the fort. Meanwhile, at the Kimball homestead, a scene of unprecedented brutality unfolded. No witnesses survived to tell the complete story, except the perpetrators themselves. The attack was swift and methodical. After the initial escape of the two men, and for children, the remaining families had little chance to scatter. The Creek warriors moved with deadly efficiency. War clubs and tomahawks rose and fell. In terrible rhythm, they killed the livestock, ensuring no resources remained. They stripped valuables from the house and most horrifically took scalps from their victims. When their savage work was done, they melted back into the dense forest, bordering the creek, leaving behind 14 bodies. Women and children, scattered throughout the house and dooryard. The entire attack lasted no more than 20 minutes. Ransom Kimball, hearing gunfire while away on horseback, raced back to his homestead. He arrived too late, finding only the aftermath of the massacre. The attackers had vanished like a destructive storm, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. His once peaceful home had become a scene of unspeakable horror. With a heart heavy with grief, Ransom retreated to the stockade. Logic would suggest that upon his arrival, an armed force would immediately set out to tend to the dead. However, most men were still at their distant plantations. When they finally returned at nightfall, the uncertainty of the Indian band's size and the very real possibility of an imminent attack on the stockade itself forced them to focus on defense. They posted pickets and prepared for battle, leaving the dead unattended. As darkness descended, a gentle rain began to fall over the killing ground, but among the seemingly lifeless bodies lay one spark of life. Mrs. Sarah Merrill, daughter of Abner James, though struck unconscious by a war club and scalped, still drew breath. The cool rain that fell through the darkness proved to be Sarah Merrill's salvation. As consciousness slowly returned, her first thoughts weren't of her own grievous wounds, but of her child in the pitch-black night. Surrounded by death, she faced an almost impossible task. Two children of identical size and age lay among the dead, and in the darkness she couldn't distinguish faces. But maternal instinct guided her hands. She remembered her child's clothing, fastened with buttons, while the other infant wore garments secured by strings. Her trembling fingers found the buttons, and with them, her 1-year-old son. The child's body still held warmth, and when she cradled him close, he stirred. His short hair had been his protection. Too brief for the warriors to grasp, it had saved him from the scalping knife that had claimed his mother. Sarah struggled to her feet, her scalped head throbbing with each movement. With her living child pressed against her chest, she stumbled away from the scene of carnage. The journey to the fort, normally a manageable walk, became an arduous test of will. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she made a desperate decision. Finding a hollow log, she gently placed her child inside, then continued her agonizing crawl towards safety. As dawn broke over the stockade, the guards witnessed an extraordinary sight. A figure approached a woman scalped and bloody, moving with desperate determination. Recognition dawned quickly, and rescuers rushed to retrieve her child. Against all odds, both mother and infant survived their ordeal. The following day, parties from the fort returned to collect their dead. They buried the bodies near the stockade, a grim reminder of the price of frontier life. The tragedy continued to claim victims. Ransom Kimball, unable to overcome his grief, died shortly after at Fort Madison. However, his son Isham, the sole survivor of the Kimball family, would go on to forge a remarkable life. Through determination and hard work, he rose to become a prominent figure in Clark County, serving many years as circuit court clerk and holding various public offices. From nothing, he built a fortune worth $40,000 and left behind numerous descendants. The massacre hadn't come without warning. On August 31st, as sunset painted the sky, a Tory Creek scout named Nye had returned to Fort Madison with alarming news. He reported the fall of Fort Mims and warned of a large Creek force led by the prophet Francis. The news sparked panic within the garrison. Men turned pale, women and children screamed in terror, all fearing they would share Fort Mims's fate. Yet as the initial shock subsided, determination took its place. The garrison steeled itself, resolved to defend their position to the last person. Nye's scouting revealed more details. In the following days, he reported to Captain Dale that Francis and his warriors had camped at the Wolf's Den, a deep ravine near Cedar Creek, just 3 miles east of Fort Madison. From there, they had moved north, before unleashing their fury on the Kimball and James families at Bassett's Creek. When news of the massacre reached Colonel Carson at Fort Madison, he acted swiftly. On the morning of September 2nd, he dispatched 11 mounted men under Lieutenant James Bailey, armed with rifles, muskets, and holster pistols. They rode for Fort Cinquefield to assist with burial duties and assess the Indian force's strength. The party included John Woods, Isaac Hayden, and James Smith, joining the approximately 15 armed men already stationed at Fort Cinquefield. Fort Cinquefield housed a diverse community of frontier settlers, primarily families from the Bassett's Creek area. Among the most prominent residents was Charles Phillips, an elderly settler whose extended family included several married children, including his son Charles Phillips Jr. The fort also provided sanctuary to a small group of Creek Indians who had allied themselves with the settlers, known then as Tory Creeks. When Lieutenant Bailey's party arrived, several garrison members joined them in the grim task of recovering the dead from the Kimball homestead. They returned with an ox cart bearing 12 bodies, silent testimony to the brutality of the attack. The settlers chose a burial site 70 yards southeast of the fort, along what would later become Grove Hill Road. As the clock approached 11, a large portion of the fort's inhabitants gathered at the freshly dug graves for the burial service. The somber mood was broken when Mrs. Sarah Phillips, wife of Charles Phillips Jr., and several other women took their buckets to fetch water from the spring. They joined other women already there doing laundry. A guard detail had been assigned to protect them, but in a fatal lapse of judgment, the guards stopped halfway down the hill, settling on a log for casual conversation instead of maintaining their protective duties. Near the fort's gateway on the western picket line, close to the southwest corner, elderly Charles Phillips and Isham Kendall sat discussing the recent massacre. Phillips, gazing southward, noticed what he thought was a flock of wild turkeys approaching the fort. "Look yonder, what a fine gang of turkeys," he called out to Kendall. But his companion's younger, sharper eyes penetrated the deception instantly. What appeared to be turkeys was actually a large band of Creek warriors, advancing in a crouched position toward the fort. The sudden cry of alarm shattered the morning's routine. Those still at the burial site rushed toward the gate, men scooping up small children as they ran. The negligent guards abandoned their post on the log, racing for the safety of the fort at the spring below. The women's washing was forgotten as they heard the desperate shouts and began their frantic climb up the hill. The Creek warriors, seeing their attempt to cut off the burial party had failed, rose to their full height and accelerated with frightening speed. Nearly 100 warriors strong, they presented a terrifying sight. Each carried an arsenal of weapons, guns, tomahawks, and war clubs. Their leader was the feared prophet Francis himself. Their appearance was designed to strike terror, faces painted for war, heads adorned with distinctive crowns of upright turkey feathers. Many warriors had adorned themselves with cow tails tied from shoulder to wrist, the long hair swaying ominously with each movement. The warriors' attention quickly shifted when they spotted the vulnerable women just beginning their desperate flight from the spring. The sight of such easy prey caused an immediate change in their attack strategy, and they adjusted their charge toward these new targets. The women's situation appeared hopeless. Each step up the steep incline drained their strength as they fought against both gravity and terror. Their long skirts tangled around their legs, threatening to trip them with every stride. Behind them, the warriors' swift feet ate up the distance, their war whoops growing louder with each passing second. The sound of running feet and jingling weapons mixed with the screams of panic, creating a hellish chorus that echoed across the valley. At this moment of supreme crisis, Isaac Hayden, watching from the fort, conceived a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. The fort kept a large pack of dogs, nearly 60 in number, used for hunting and security. These weren't just ordinary pets. They were tough frontier dogs, accustomed to confronting bears and wolves. Hayden knew their potential. Without hesitation, he leaped onto the nearest horse, checking the twin holster pistols attached to the saddle. Then he began whistling and calling, his voice cutting through the chaos. The dogs responded immediately, their ears perking up at his familiar command. As Hayden spurred his horse downhill, the entire pack surged forward with him. Massive hunting hounds, fierce guard dogs, and quick shepherd crosses, all baying and snarling as they charged the creek. Warriors, despite their fearsome reputation and superior numbers, found themselves facing an entirely unexpected threat. The dogs hit their line like a furious wave, leaping at throats, snapping at legs, and creating complete chaos in the warriors' formerly orderly charge. Some dogs latched onto arms, wielding weapons, while others went straight for faces. The warriors were forced to defend themselves against dozens of attacking animals coming from all directions. The battle became a swirling melee of fur and flesh. Several dogs fell to tomahawk blows or gunshots, while others sustained serious wounds but continued fighting. The warriors' formation completely broke down as they fought the savage canine assault. Their war cries turned to shouts of surprise and pain as sharp teeth found their marks. Hayden didn't waste the opportunity his canine allies had created. Through the chaos, he spotted a warrior closing in on one of the fleeing women. The Indian had already raised his tomahawk for a killing blow when Hayden spurred his horse forward. Raising his pistol as he galloped through the mayhem, Hayden took careful aim despite his horse's motion. His shot rang out true, and the warrior fell dead, his weapon dropping harmlessly to the ground. The dog's ferocious attack bought precious time, allowing most of the women to reach safety. Among them was a black woman who, in her panic, never thought to abandon her washing pot. She ran the entire distance with it perfectly balanced on her head, her terror overriding any thought of dropping it. The sight would have been comical if the stakes hadn't been so deadly. Near the gate, young Miss Winnie Odom's strength finally failed her. Just yards from safety, she collapsed from exhaustion and fear. A quick-thinking soldier, seeing her fall, rushed out with his gun ready. Grabbing her by her long hair, he dragged her roughly but effectively through the gate. In normal times, such treatment would have been unthinkable, but these desperate moments demanded desperate measures. However, not everyone would reach safety, Mrs. Sarah Phillips, pregnant and unable to keep pace with the others, fell behind despite her desperate efforts. As she struggled up the hill, 3 warriors broke from the main group to pursue her. One was a prophet, his face painted in particularly terrifying patterns. He waved a staff topped with a cow's tail, screaming otherworldly chants that froze the blood of all who heard them. Mrs. Phillips ran with all the strength her condition allowed, but she had only made it halfway to the fort when her body betrayed her. The combination of terror, exhaustion, and her pregnancy proved too much. She stumbled and fell, her consciousness fading. Even as she fought to rise again, had she managed to stay on her feet, she might have reached the gate. The prophet reached her first, but it was another warrior who delivered the fatal blow. With practiced efficiency, he brought his tomahawk down into her skull, then tore away her scalp as she lay dying. The warriors mutilated her body further, following their brutal customs, even as Hayden was shooting down another of their comrades nearby. Hayden had performed miracles with his improvised cavalry charge and canine army, saving numerous lives through his quick thinking and courage. But even his heroic efforts couldn't save everyone. On that bloody morning, his horse, streaming with sweat and spattered with blood, stood heaving as the last survivors made it through the gate, while around him, his surviving dogs continued to harass the warriors, buying precious seconds for the fort's defenders to secure their position. After his daring rescue, Hayden found himself in a moment of paralyzing indecision. His instincts pulled him in opposite directions. The woods offered potential escape, while the fort promised relative safety. In that crucial moment of hesitation, an inexplicable impulse seized him. Rather than choosing either option, he spurred his exhausted horse into one final, desperate gallop. The animal responded magnificently, its hooves thundering against the earth as it circled the entire fort at full speed, presenting a clear target to dozens of Creek warriors. As Hayden completed his wild circuit and aimed for the fort's entrance, Creek rifles cracked from every direction. Bullets whizzed past him, tearing through his clothing. Later counting would reveal 5 distinct holes where death had missed him by inches. His horse cleared the gateway in a magnificent leap, carrying its rider to apparent safety. But just as they crossed the threshold, a Creek bullet found its mark. The faithful animal struck through the neck, collapsed immediately inside the fort's wall.